we are here today for arraignment in this matter on behalf of Mr. Rittenhouse. Mr. Richards, do you acknowledge receipt of a copy of the information?
Your Honor, I would acknowledge receipt of the information, waive the reading of the information. I have went over all the potential penalties with my client. He's aware of them. I've also e-filed a jury demand on count 6 for a 6-person jury and the $36 fee earlier today.
All right, thank you. I assume then at this point you're going to be entering pleas?
Yes, prepared to enter not guilty pleas to all the charges contained therein.
All right, thank you very much. Not guilty pleas to all counts contained in the information are noted and entered for the record. Matter shall now be counted for further proceedings before the Honorable Bruce E. Schrader presiding. And any and all previously imposed bond conditions and issues of bail have remain in full force and effect. Do you understand that, Mr. Rittenhouse?
Yes, sir.
And welcome to Law and Crime. This is the Law and Crime Report. That was Kyle Rittenhouse's defense at the last hearing acknowledging his bond conditions. Good afternoon. I'm Angelica Spanos. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to get into today's top legal headlines and true crime stories. First off, old social media posts are revealing new details about Kyle Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse is accused of shooting 2 men and injuring others in Kenosha, Wisconsin, during protests back in August. He told police that he was attacked while he was guarding a business during BLM protests and the civil unrest that broke out after the police shooting of a black man there. Well, Rittenhouse said that he fired in self-defense. He faces multiple charges, including 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. Now, after seeing social media posts, prosecutors are asking the courts to modify his bond. The request is for Rittenhouse to be prohibited from possessing or consuming alcohol, being in a bar or restaurant that serves alcohol, and not allowed to make public displays of white supremacy, and also asking that he has no contact with any members of violent groups that he may have been identifying with. This is after a picture surfaced of him and his mother out. He was doing a white supremacy sort of symbol, and it was drinking a beer, I believe. We're going to break this all down with our guests today, Julie Rendelman, Law and Crime legal analyst, as well as Brian Dunn, managing partner at the Cochran firm. Thank you both for joining us today. Happy Friday to you. Julie, coming out to you first. What do you think of the request from Rittenhouse to these prosecutors, and what do you think is going to happen?
So I'm surprised this request didn't happen prior to him being released. Usually when there's, bail set, the idea would be to say, and if in fact bail is set, there should be certain conditions. One would expect the most simplest of conditions is that he not be permitted to continue showing and, being with individuals, that support his position in terms of racism and anti-Semitism that he seems to support. So I'm surprised this didn't happen sooner. My expectation is the judge is going to set down the rules, and it will include him not being permitted to do that or go into a bar to have drinks. That's my guess.
All right. And Brian Dunn, do you agree with Julie there?
I absolutely do. And I think one of the interesting things to look at when we're talking about bail here is that this individual is being looked at for some very serious charges. First-degree murder is about as serious as it gets. He is out immediately. He leaves court and goes to a bar, and he's drinking, and he's doing this white power sign. But his mom is right there when this is happening. So that tells you that somehow he is getting some kind of tacit acquiescence to this racist behavior from his mother. And when you look at the genesis of why a man would bring a gun to a situation in which he is purportedly defending property, you have to think about what's the real motivation here. And when you see this level of violence, I think it's really important to understand that it seems as though the family that he comes from may have had something to do with it.
Absolutely. All right. Our host, Law and Crime's daily host, Brian Buckmeyer, thinks that Rittenhouse's constitutional rights are being infringed upon with these motions filed by the prosecutor. Let's listen to what he said on this topic.
Guys, maybe it's the Canadian in me that's been drinking legally since 19, but these requests, to me at least, seem unconstitutional. Now, Terry, equal protection law. If a 21-year-old was arrested for murder, bailed out, and had a beer, no prosecutor would be asking for more bail restrictions. So why the problem here if Rittenhouse legally consumed alcohol?
You know, Brian, the original bail conditions did not include restricting the alcohol or restricting him from going into a bar or fraternizing. And frankly, I don't think there's any legal basis to have those types of restrictions. I think they are just trying to make a point, and for optic reasons, they're trying to say, look, you can't go out, you can't drink, you can't fraternize, you can't wear anything on your clothing that looks as though you might be associated with white supremacists. Frankly, I don't think it's going to prevail.
All right, Julie. So this contradicts what you said beforehand. What are your reactions to Brian's thought here that this is unconstitutional?
So we see it all the time in federal cases where a judge will indicate that a person can be released on certain conditions. Conditions can be no use of drugs, no use of alcohol. That is not an unconstitutional request on the part of the judge to mandate that someone who has been released, and the basis of the release is the fact that they put up bail, that they refrain from certain activity. By the way, let's keep in mind that if this individual drinks, it is possible that that may be one additional thing that doesn't hinder him from going out and doing something like this again. So I don't think it's unconstitutional to request and limit certain behavior on the part of the defendants. By the way, keep in mind, defendants are allowed to be kept in their homes with an ankle bracelet on and preventing them from leaving their homes, which is way more restrictive than telling them they can't drink.
Good point there. All right. And Brian, I wanted to ask you about how social media plays into this, because this is sort of new when it comes to legal issues happening. We have now social media posts which reveal so many things about people, and maybe them not knowing that this could lead to trouble for them down the road. So talk about the balance of putting things on social media, but then knowing that this could come back to get you later on.
Well, we see this all the time. And a lot of times when people are posting things on social media, they have no idea they have no idea as to the consequences later on for doing this. And they don't have the presence of mind a lot of times before they're arrested or immediately after to delete everything that's on there. And we've seen this a lot of times. But what it basically does is it informs the psychology that's underlying this event. I have a saying that things don't just happen. They don't happen in the first instance. There was a mindset that was fermenting within this young man that exploded onto the scene on that particular horrible night. But the reality is social media is the way that people honestly express themselves. They don't do it in public forums, in a microphone in front of large crowds. They're more likely to be honest about who they are in the private setting of their own home, which is where social media posts normally happen. But I think that this is a big factor because something about his racial motivation is underlying why he was out there that evening with that type of weapon.
Absolutely. And along with the social media posts, in this instance, his actions were also caught on cell phone camera. So you have the social media angle here, and then you have this option that everyone has a recording device in their pocket at all times. So it's sort of a double whammy that he's dealing with.
I'm sorry. Keep going. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I cut you off. I'm so sorry.
Because we see plain sight on the video.
Yeah, people keep saying he's accused of shooting someone, and this is alleged to have shot someone. No, he shot someone. We saw it in plain sight. You know, he pulled out the gun and shot someone. Now, what his motivation was for doing it, or whether he was legally justified, may be one thing. But it's as if we're so scared of saying what actually happened that we're kind of ignoring the reality. He did kill 2 people with a gun. It happened.
Right.
Sorry.
Exactly. All right. Brian Dunn, thank you so much. Julie Rendelman, thank you. We're taking our first break right now. When we come back, plenty more topics today. Stay with us here on the Law and Crime Report. And welcome back to the Law and Crime Report. Recall back to 2016. You'll remember 12 people died and more than 80 were sickened during the Flint water crisis in Michigan. Well, now authorities are holding officials there responsible. Prosecutors are charging 9 officials, including the former governor of the state, Rick Snyder. He faces 2 counts of willful neglect of duty. Snyder has pleaded not guilty. Now, 8 other of the people charged are his staffers, as well as city and state health officials. Basically, this is happening after an investigation was conducted. Let's review what happened from our own Brian Buckmeyer.
Damaging effects on children that will follow them for generations to come. We didn't put a price tag or come in with a certain list of charges.
More than 80 people were sickened and 12 died after the city changed its drinking water from a treated source to the Flint River in 2014. Prosecutors now say actions by government officials were criminal.
This case is about justice, truth, accountability, poisoned children, lost lives, shattered families that are still not whole, and simply giving a damn about all of humanity.
A grand jury indicted 9 individuals for a total of 42 counts, including former Governor Rick Snyder for 2 misdemeanors of willful neglect and 2 former heads of the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services for involuntary manslaughter.
Nicholas Lyon, former director of MDHHS, is charged with 9 counts of involuntary manslaughter, for each a 15-year felony, and 1 count of willful neglect of duty, a 1-year misdemeanor. Eden Wells, former chief medical executive, is charged with 9 counts of involuntary manslaughter, each a 15-year felony, and 1 count of willful neglect of duty. In addition, she is charged with 2 separate counts of misconduct in office, separate incidences of preventing or attempting to prevent the distribution of public health information.
Scientists learned lead from aging pipes leaked into the city's water supply, the possible source of a deadly Legionnaire's disease outbreak. The grand jury proceedings are secret, but prosecutors say their team reviewed millions of documents and hundreds of electronic devices.
One of these resources included enlisting a group of world-renowned infectious disease experts to study the deaths in this case and to study the deaths in Flint that were potentially related to Legionella. It is critical that these deaths be reviewed by unbiased, highly qualified professionals. These experts individually reviewed each case and made an independent determination as to each and every cause of death.
All right, so that was Brian Buckmeyer going through the details of this investigation. Basically, after reviewing documents, electronic devices, and executing a ton of search warrants, this is what was brought. All these charges now going to these 9 state officials. Julie, I'll come out to you first. What do you make of these charges? I mean, most seriously, the medical executive getting 9 counts of involuntary manslaughter. I mean, these are big charges here.
Yeah, keep in mind they went into a grand jury. Some of the officials walked away with misdemeanors. One assumes that the jury did not believe that certain high-ranking officials were as responsible as others. But you also have to remember that, the prosecution, if I recall, had dropped the ball before on this case. There had been several charges filed against several individuals in the years past, and it turned out that the prosecutor had screwed up. There were boxes, I believe, found downstairs of paperwork that hadn't been disclosed. So I think everybody has dropped the ball. It's about time somebody or several people are held responsible. So we'll see what happens.
And the prosecutors have the evidence that led to these charges. So are you confident that these will, they'll be successful?
Look, I mean, I don't know what the specific evidence is. And keep in mind, most of these charges are not intentional charges, involuntary manslaughter, recklessness. There seems to be no question that there was a cover up. And it seems to be no question that money seemed to be, the idea of cost effectiveness seemed to be something that, influenced the decision making instead of making sure that the community of Flint was kept safe. And so these are things that aren't just civil, they rise to the level of criminal. And so as to whether each individual is going to be held equally responsible, time will tell. But I think at the end of the day, at least someone is going to go down for this case.
And Brian, with what Julie just said, I'm assuming that some of these people will go down, but also some of them will probably try to appeal these allegations or, fight back in what way they can.
Well, you don't typically see intentional or you don't typically see involuntary manslaughter arising out of a situation involving water and the handling of water. But I think what we have to look at is the deeper issue here, which is a huge segment of the population was affected by this. And these weren't people who were rich. This was a lot of people who saw themselves on the outside looking in terms of the feeling disenfranchised, as if, our very health and security doesn't matter to the powers that be. And I think what we have here is a statement that, yes, this was wrong. Yes, we're going to do something about it. It's not even going to come close to really handling the actual aftermath of this, which is going to last for decades. You're going to have people showing up with cancer late in their lives. So when you really talk about why this criminal prosecution happened, it happened because there is a need to have a sense of justice and equality in this particular community, which has been so ravaged by this. And when we also talk about how it played out, there's a difference between making a mistake and continuing on with your mistake after you know it's a mistake and after you know it's helping people. A lot of the damage here could have been ameliorated if they had, as Julie indicated, ameliorated the problem earlier, but it would have been very expensive to do that.
All right. Thank you both. We're going to switch gears right now. Another story right now out of Florida. A mother there is charged in her autistic son's murder, and now she's the center of a big court decision. The question is, if she should be declared indignant. Now, Patricia Ripley faces a first-degree murder charge and a first-degree premeditated attempted murder charge in the death of drowning her 9-year-old son. In a hearing, a judge reversed an earlier decision that said that she was indignant. The woman owns a home in the Dominican Republic and in Florida. The prosecutor argued that Ripley is not indignant as she has the possibility to make money through these real estate properties. So this is the issue ongoing right now. Let's listen to a part of the January 14th hearing.
Johnson had granted that, and without a hearing. At that time, Ms. Levine objected, Mr. Lake objected, and Judge Johnson reversed his decision and found that Ms. Ripley was not indigent for costs based upon an expectation of future earnings.
Entonces, la abogada quiere reiterar que la petición para el estado de indigencia se había dictaminado por el juez Johnson sin una audiencia. La señora Levine y la otra abogada habían estipulado esto, pero el juez cambió de opinión y basado en los ingresos futuros, entonces por eso se reversó, se cambió esta estipulación.
Your Honor, just to address that issue, I think to be more clear on this is we had a very lengthy evidentiary hearing on this issue. And so the only factor that has allegedly changed, and we're not taking any position one way or the other on this, is the issue of the out-of-country property. All the other facts, I believe, remain the same.
This property located in the Dominican Republic is not even in Ms. Ripley's name. This property is still in her grandfather's name, and her grandfather is deceased. It would then pass to her mother, who is also deceased, and Ms. Ripley is in the line of succession. Now, this is a property that was taken over by the Dominican Republic's government in an eminent domain proceeding. We are waiting to see how much the Dominican Republic is willing to pay for the land and when they are willing to pay it. Because of COVID.
I'm sorry, Honor, interpret hasn't been given an opportunity to interpret.
I apologize.
Su señoría, quiero hacer esto muy claro. Este tema con la propiedad que está localizada en Santo Domingo, en la República Dominicana, no está a nombre de la señorita Ripley, estaba a nombre del abuelo de la señorita, el cual ya ha fallecido, y después pasó a la madre de la señorita, la que también ha fallecido. Estas propiedades fueron tomadas por una toma directa por el gobierno, y en este momento estamos esperando a ver si el gobierno está dispuesto a vender estas propiedades. Thank you.
The family has had a private appraisal done. The government's appraisal is very different in terms of what they're willing to pay, and that's still a negotiation. So there's no money there at all. Right now, Ms. Ripley has no access to money in a case where the state is seeking the death penalty. I have been unable to take any depositions. I've been unable to obtain experts. She is basically without a defense.
All right. So we heard from both sides here, and we hear her defense saying that these properties aren't in her name anymore. They were seized by eminent domain. So, Julie, when we're talking about this and the criteria of why and how someone is declared indigent, what do you make and what do you think about this?
I'll be honest, I can't believe this is right now being litigated. One of the things that stood out in my head is the statement expectation of future earnings. Well, an expectation of future earnings has nothing to do with whether or not she could afford a defense now. And the only thing that matters is whether or not she can afford a defense now, right now, and she can't. And so there's no question that she's entitled to free counsel and she's entitled to free experts. If in the future at some point there's some indication that she comes into money, then perhaps that's a different story. And also keep in mind, it's not like she purchased property in order to avoid paying legal bills. Just so we're clear, I mean, the crime that is committed is atrocious. The video is atrocious, but that does not mean that she is not entitled to free legal assistance. And there's nothing so far I've heard that indicates otherwise.
And why do you think the judge went back and forth on this?
Well, remember, the prosecution is their position and the defense is their position. But I'm still unclear as to what indication there is that money is readily available. Keep in mind, if you have property, you still have to sell that property in order to have money. So I'm not really sure what the issue is. Perhaps there's something we don't know about that the judge knows. I just don't know.
Okay, Julie, thank you. And Brian, aside from the first-degree murder charge, there's a first-degree premeditated and attempted murder charge. And that's because we know that she tried to throw off family members here and say that he had drowned, and she tried to kind of do this multiple times. She said that law enforcement said that she admitted to thinking about killing her son for some time because he was becoming hard to control. Now, when you have things like that are showing this is premeditated, it goes back to what Julie was saying. It's surprising that this is even being debated because this crime is atrocious.
Well, there are a few things going on here. I have to disagree with Julie on the issue with property. I've represented a whole lot of people who have been in trouble financially and indigent. I've never had a client that's had a home anywhere. And it's been said that the two times you want to look poor are when you're paying taxes and when you're dealing with a criminal prosecution. I think that they're absolutely right in making an issue out of this, firstly. Now, secondly, when we talk about the idea of what happened here, there are a lot of circumstances that do indicate that her state of mind was contemplating this ahead of time. There were some allegations that she said that some men of color were responsible for this. There are some allegations that she had previously echoed publicly the idea that this is something that she thought she might do. I'm old enough to remember the Susan Smith case out of 1994, and it has a very, very similar fact pattern. And she actually went down for having that state of mind. And I think here, when you look at what happened, I do agree definitely that we have to keep our mind focused on the crime because we need justice for those people who can't speak for themselves. She definitely is going to have an uphill battle in trying to show that somehow this is something that she didn't think about beforehand. And I think that a lot of the issues that we're seeing are the justice system is forcing her to answer for her actions.
And going off that, do you think that she could possibly plead guilty before a trial here to avoid the death penalty?
Unless there's some type of insanity situation, I think that's going to be pretty highly unlikely. It's just too horrible a crime.
Okay.
Dead children are about as bad as it gets.
Okay, Brian, thank you. This matter was continued. She's going to be back in front of a judge in February, so we will keep you updated on that story out of Florida. We're taking a break right now. Stay with us after this. And welcome back to the Law and Crime Report. A man from Jupiter, Florida, has been sentenced to 38 years in prison for murdering his ex-wife. We're talking about David Anthony. He's 44 years old. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and kidnapping back in December. He took a plea deal where he had to tell police where the remains of his ex-wife's body were. It's unclear exactly how his ex-wife Gretchen was killed. Those autopsy results have not yet been released. At his sentencing, though, members of her family, members of his family, they were all in court to testify on behalf. He also spoke at his own sentencing. Let's listen.
But from the heart. Understand my actions weigh heavy on the hearts of many in attendance today. So what do you say in a situation like this? How can my words have any weight, given my crime? When will the pain end, knowing that I'm the cause of it? Coming from me, what words can console a family who has lost someone so dear, so tragically? Is there anything I can say that will comfort a girl who has lost a mother? Are there any words that will ease the burden of a mother who has lost a daughter? No. How do I offer anything of value to a sister and brother who lost a sister, friends who lost a friend? I've created irreparable damage in the worlds of people who love me. Gretchen loved me, Ava loved me, and Gretchen's family loved me. And I shunned that love with a cold-hearted, evil act. I disgraced my family. I'm hated by some beyond words, and have brought shame upon my name. Some would call for my death, and I can't offer any reasonable argument against that sentiment. All I can offer is acknowledgement of my actions and a prayer of forgiveness for my loss of self-control.
All right, so that's the defendant there at his own sentencing. This is a complicated story. Basically, he reported his ex-wife missing back in March of 2020, but he was misleading her family members and other people by sending text messages from her phone to throw them off. He was saying that she was sick. He said that she had COVID. And then eventually he ended up taking this plea deal and leading to police to her remains. So this is a wild story here. Julie, what do you make of the 38 years for him?
So 38 years is pretty low. We like to see us, if I was a New York prosecutor, I'd want to see life at the end of it. I think one of the problems is trying to determine cause of death because sometimes the remains do not allow that to happen. I think one of the great things about this case that many prosecutors can learn from is the idea of making sure that the victim's family gets answers. And so making sure that the defendant provides information as to where the body is. We see this in Fotis Dulis. Everyone's still waiting to hear where the body is. GSK and many of the people that are still missing, we still want to know where their bodies are. And so it's something that I think at least gives some level of closure to the victim's family that they can, finally bury their loved one.
Right, absolutely. And Brian, do you agree with Julie on that the 38 years is a bit low?
Well, absolutely. But Julie said something that really did move me, and she's talking about what the family goes through when something like this happens. And that's just needing to know what the last moments of your loved one's life was like. I personally had a homicide in my family last year, and I can tell you it didn't play out over a protracted period of time like this. But you hear about it from a phone call. It's a very jarring experience because you don't really know much. And here we have a situation where he's trying to act like he's being contrite in court. But in reality, he showed a lot of callousness in the aftermath of this incident by actually lying to the family members, using her cell phone to try to create the false illusion that she was still alive and sick. And we still don't really know how she died. So when he talks about his actions and he feels sorry for his actions, what were those actions? Did he choke her out? Did he shoot her?
Right.
Did he strangle her? What caused her? We don't even really know what happened, and the family still doesn't know what happened. So we're still kind of left with this void. So when you start talking about 38 years, that is, it could have been a life sentence. In many situations, it would be a life sentence. But I really have to take a hard stop on the contrition that he showed in court, because where was that when his ex-wife, needed it?
Absolutely. And he sits in front of her family members in that courtroom and has the, reaction, and it's a bit emotional. And as you said, he's able to do that, but not give them the answers they need as to what he did with her body and how her life ended. So as you said, it is pretty emotional. And not only that, but just terrible that the family doesn't get that closure, right?
Right, and that's exactly what you need. In order to rebuild and in order to actually put an event like this behind you, you need to know what happened. As bad as it may be, you need to be able to synthesize that information, process it as a family. And that's kind of the first step. And we still don't even have that first step because he's not saying what happened. They're relying on a forensic pathologist to say how this poor woman lost her life. And I got a problem with that. Angelica.
All right, Brian, Julie, thank you. Let's move on. This story a bit better here, happier. The city of Dallas is renaming a 4-mile stretch of road in honor of Botham Jean. Jean was murdered in his apartment by an off-duty police officer, Amber Geiger, in 2018. The Dallas City Council voted on the name change this week. They're doing this from the mayor as well as some council members there. And basically, the stretch of road is being named after him. It includes the Southside Flat apartment building where he lived, and that's where he was killed. And also, I believe it includes one of the police department buildings. So this shows the citizens of Dallas that his name and his death are not in vain, and it shows the world that his life mattered. We know this story well. We covered it extensively, this trial here on the network when it was happening. But we have a package right now, a tribute, if you will, that we want to play from Law&Crime's Aaron Keller. Let's listen.
I am Botham Jean, and I am a senior accounting and management information systems major, and I am from the island of St. Lucia.
That is the voice, and this is the face of the man whose life ended with the pull of a trigger in Dallas.
With me.
Chaos surrounded Botham Jean's final moments, but friends and family remember other things: a bright smile and uplifting music. At Harding University, a Christian college in Arkansas,
Let's praise God this morning.
Jean was an active singer.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul. Oh my soul.
Follow the law.
In the trial of his shooter, Botham Jean's sister described him from the witness stand as his portrait sat nearby.
When he started high school, he started a choir. At the high school, he also started song leading at our church, Church of Christ, and he fell in love with music. He even wrote songs, church songs.
Mourners who attended Jean's funeral wore red, his favorite color.
He was very active in his community, in his hometown in St. Lucia, in terms of serving the youth and in terms of just doing a lot of community service.
Attorney Sue Ann Robinson is of counsel to a law firm which represents Jean's relatives.
The family does definitely want Amber Geiger brought to justice for what she did. I think the outcome is going to be a conviction on murder. That is the outcome that they're looking for.
Yes, there is evidence Botham Jean was not perfect. He used marijuana to treat ADHD. When that became public, critics lashed out at those who thought it disparaged him. And back at Harding, Jean leaves a legacy.
Let the weak say I am strong.
The university and his family cherish the music.
We found 4 songs that he wrote, all about Christ and wanting to get to heaven.
It's not just notes and words. A planned $50,000 scholarship in Jean's honor swelled to more than $500,000 with support from his employer.
The family has chosen to deal with it by celebrating his life as opposed to focusing on how his life has ended.
Botham Jean. A life ended with tragedy, a legacy of hope.
Just a little talk with Jesus makes it right. Oh, it's all right. It's all right.
This is Aaron Keller for the Law and Crime Network.
Oh, it's all right. It's all right. Just a little talk with Jesus makes it right.
All right, so a touching tribute there about Botham Jean's life. You'll recall that he loved music. He was very much influential in his community. And obviously, this renaming of the road here is happy for his family and for those who want to remember him. And as Aaron mentioned in that story so many times, is the legacy that he left behind. Julie, you know, we covered Amber Geiger trial live together, and we, you know, seemingly talked about this for a long time during that trial. This is a happy thing that his legacy is being honored and he's getting remembered here, right?
Yeah, no, I remember this case obviously incredibly very well. And I think, you know, there was so much surrounding, you know, what the final decision would be, whether it would be an intentional crime, whether it be a reckless crime, you know, and the jury spoke. And we have to remember, no matter what your opinion is in regards to what the final verdict was, the only thing, you know, Botham Jean did wrong was be in his own home that he had the right to be in. And live his own life when he was interrupted by someone who lived downstairs. And I think one of the things that stands out about these legacies in terms of having a street named for you is in 20 years, in 30 years, in 50 years, when you are driving by with your child and your child asks you, well, what does that mean? You can tell them the story of this individual and what it meant for police reform, what he meant to the community. And that's what's so important about this symbol. It might not mean much to others, but to me it does, because it means that his legacy will live on for the years to come.
That's so well said. Absolutely, Julie. And I want to ask you, Brian, about another thing, because Amber Geiger was convicted of murder and sentenced to 10 years in prison for this. And last August, her attorneys filed an appeal saying that there was a lack of evidence and that the evidence was insufficient. What do you make of that?
It's not going to go anywhere. She had a full trial, and the concept that her due process rights were violated just is not going to go anywhere. I think that a lot of times when you have a murder conviction, this is something that is perfunctory. But I don't really see that aspect of the case as having any traction. Most murder cases that have significant sentences, I wouldn't call it 10 years a significant sentence, but you see appeals in these cases. But I really want to echo what Julie was saying about the community coming together to honor the good parts of this man's life, to honor his life, to honor the essence of his soul by naming the street after him. We had the employer who raised $500,000 just out of the goodness of their heart. So we see that there's a humanity that is going to shine through all of the things that many people would say were unfair about the way the justice system treated this situation. And this was such an angelic soul. I mean, the only thing that they could bring out on him was that he had done marijuana. I think if you went through the California State Bar, you'd find worse and most worse things on file for most attorneys. But it's just, this was an angel. He was truly an angel, and his life is going to be remembered that way. And that's something that I think is going to live a lot longer than the feelings of injustice do.
Brian, thank you. Julie, thank you. That was so well said again. So yeah, we want to repeat that Botham Jean, they are naming a 4-mile stretch of road in honor of him in Dallas. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, our last topic of the day here on the Law and Crime Report. Stay with us after this. And welcome back to the Law and Crime Report. New York Attorney General Letitia James is suing the New York City Police Department over its excessive, brutal, and unlawful handling of the George Floyd protesters. Now, this suit comes after investigations into the NYPD's actions during riots that happened May through December. Now, these were surrounding the outrage and the death of George Floyd while he was in police custody in Minneapolis back in May of last year. It was a tumultuous time. The repercussions of this went through the nation, really, and it became a nationwide dialogue and movement. Let's look at some of the protests from New York City, and we'll play you that now. All right, so those were some of the images out of New York during that time period. The investigation is saying that police officers used unjustified and repeated use of force. This came from pepper spray, batons, kettling the rioters and the protesters. There was also discussion that some of them were using physical force against some peaceful protesters. So the NYPD they said that the NYPD blatantly violated the rights of these people, and that is the basis here of the suit. I want to get your reaction to this, Julie, because this is something that was specific to New York, but this is a national movement. And talk about how that plays in with this incident.
So we all have to realize it's not surprising that this lawsuit came down. We were all expecting it. We knew there was investigation in place. We knew that many things had gone wrong, certainly in New York and in many other cities, in regards to how the police department was handling the protesters. And one of the things that I've said from the start, and you do have to realize also, it's not just the NYPD. Bill de Blasio was named in this lawsuit in New York because many people think it's not just the NYPD that is responsible for what went down during those protests. Many, and I tend to agree, feel that there was absolutely no guidance, no leadership as to what needed to happen. And we all know that one of the big issues with regards to reform is training, where officers need to be taught how to respond, but they also need to be told how to respond depending on the scenario that's before them. And I don't want to lose sight of one thing. Many individuals were injured. Many members of the NYPD acted very inappropriately and criminally. You must not forget that there were also members of the NYPD that were injured, that crimes were committed against them. And I don't want to make pretend that those events didn't happen, because crimes were also committed against members of the NYPD without any right or basis on their part. But this lawsuit was expected. I think everyone is begging and wants reform. Let's just hope that this leads us in the right direction.
Julie and Brian, I'll let you weigh in before the end of the show here. You mentioned that the timing of this plays in here since this was filed this week. Comment on that real fast.
Well, we know it was a long investigation, but what is really central in the public's imagination right now is how the riots that happened on January 6th were comparatively lenient in terms of the law enforcement response as compared to some of the black.
We're not going to get you. We're not going to be able to let you finish here. I apologize for that. Thank you so much for being with us today, Brian and Julie. We have a regular scheduled programming coming up after this.